We live in interesting times. Today's stories. Netanyahu vows massive strikes in response to Gaza rocket barrages.
הטרור ברצועת עזה, וכן הנחיתי לעבות.
Polarized North Macedonians cast votes for president. Climate march in France ahead of the G7 Environment Summit. Indonesia sinks scores of boats to deter illegal fishing. Barr says to senators, the Justice Department's job is over after the Mueller report.
Now, in the hands of the American people, everyone can decide for themselves.
President Trump says Mueller report made Putin sort of smile during their call.
To the effect that it started off as a mountain and it ended up being a mouse.
Boeing plane skids into Florida River in crash landing. Its cause has yet to be determined.
The runway 10 here at Naval Air Station Jacksonville.
Trump says Kim Jong-un, and I quote, does not want to break his promise to me. Plus, EBC adds correspondents to its New Jersey and Pennsylvania bureaus, strengthening its North America team.
There's just something about it that's like, it's second to none.
Hello everyone, I'm Ace Ramirez, bringing you stories from around the globe. And this is Eagle News, Washington, D.C. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows to continue massive strikes in response to a rocket fire from the Gaza Strip, as a deadly escalation entered a second day, sparking fears of wider violence.
אני הנחיתי הבוקר את צה"ל להמשיך בתקיפות המסיביות נגד גורמי הטרור ברצועת עזה, וכן הנחיתי לעבות את הכוחות סביב רצועת עזה בכוחות שריון, ארטילריה וחי"ר. החמאס נושא באחריות לא רק להתקפות ולפעולות שלו, אלא גם לפעולות של הג'יהאד האסלאמי, והוא משלם על כך מחיר כבד מאוד. אני מבקש מאזרחי ישראל, יישמרו, אני אוסיף את המילה בקפדנות, יישמרו בקפדנות להוראות פיקוד העורף, אלה הוראות שממש מצילות חיים. אנחנו פועלים ונמשיך לפעול כדי להחזיר את השקט והביטחון לתושבי הדרום.
Israeli police and the hospital said rockets launched overnight from the Gaza Strip hit the Israeli town of Ashkelon near the border, killing one 58-year-old Israeli man. North Macedonians returned to the ballot box Sunday for a presidential runoff that risks creating a political headache for the ruling Social Democrats, whose candidate is pitted against a nationalist-backed rival. The center-left ruling party Stevo Penderovsky and the right-wing pick Gordana Silyanovska-Davkova finished in a dead heat in the first round of voting last month. The tie traced the near-even split between the pro-Western and nationalist camps, who have clashed over the government's recent move to change the Balkan country's name to North Macedonia, which ended a long-running row with Greece. But a record-low turnout at barely over 40% also reflected a failure to galvanize most of the 1.8 million voters. If voter participation sinks below 40% in Sunday's second-round runoff, the entire poll will be annulled, threatening a new period of political uncertainty in one of Europe's poorest states. Prime Minister Zoran Zaev is confident, and I quote, the elections will succeed. But if not, he said he would call a snap poll for parliament. The presidential vote would also likely be rerun from the start, though Zaev has floated over options involving constitutional changes. The presidency is a largely ceremonial role, but the office can exercise veto powers that complicate governing. The current president, opposition-backed George Ivanov, has been refusing to sign bills since the country changed its name to North Macedonia in protest against the deal. The small, landlocked state has weathered repeated bouts of political turmoil in recent years, with nearly 10 elections in the past decade doing little to boost the public's faith in politicians. David Stevenson, a political consultant based in Skopje, said turnout on Sunday will be a challenge in light of election fatigue and low voter enthusiasm. But he said the tight first round could spark more energy for the runoff. He said, and I quote, "What's important is to elect a president in a free, fair, and democratic process. Failure to do so risks another period of political instability, which would likely harm the country's European perspective and damage economic growth." Zaev said he would also call an early general election in the event of a loss by 56-year-old Penderovsky, who is championing efforts to forge closer links with the West. A victory by 63-year-old Silyanovska Davkova would be a clear rebuke to a government that staked its reputation on passing the name accord with Greece earlier this year. The addition of North to the country's name was a compromise to end a nearly 30-year identity row with Athens that had blocked Skopje, NATO, and European Union ambitions. It remains a divisive topic and a key talking point for the presidential candidates, with Penderovsky for the deal and Silyanovska Davkova against.
In France, Yellow Vest protesters and ecologists joined forces in a march in the northwestern city of Metz ahead of the G7 Environment Ministers Summit there on Sunday and Monday. Police say 3,000 people took part in this world march for ecological and social justice, while the organizers put the figure at between 4,500 to 5,000.
Actuellement, c'est Macron qui est au pouvoir et qui essaie d'exterminer son peuple.
Film stars Juliette Binoche and Emmanuel Biart joined hundreds of people from the arts world in backing France's Yellow Vests movement Saturday, as the latest anti-government marches got underway. Binoche and Biart joined 1,400 signatories to an open letter published in the left-leaning daily Liberation. Entitled Yellow Vests, We Are Not Fooled, it denounced what it said were attempts to discredit the movement and back the demands of the protesters. These included calls for greater social and fiscal justice and radical measures to tackle what they called an ecological emergency. The open letter also condemned what it said were the increasingly repressive measures taken against the movement, noting that international organizations such as United Nations and the European Union had already expressed their concern. Binoche and Biart were among the most prominent signatories, which also included directors, scriptwriters, and composers. Binoche won an Oscar for her role in The English Patient, while Biart is perhaps best known internationally for her role in the first Mission Impossible film. Turnout for Saturday's marches appeared to be down in the wake of the May Day rallies when Yellow Vest activists joined the traditional trade union march. An early count from the Interior Ministry, regularly dismissed as inaccurate by the Yellow Vest movement, put the turnout at 3,600 across France, including 1,000 in the capital. In the southwest city of Bordeaux, where support for the movement has been strong, 61-year-old teaching assistant Jose acknowledged that the movement was running out of steam a little. He said, and I quote, "That's 25 weeks that we have put our life on hold for a bit to at least get back a minimum of dignity."
business pour le capitalisme. Alors c'est
Indonesia began sinking dozens of impounded foreign boats Saturday to deter illegal fishing in its waters, a week after a naval vessel clashed with a Vietnamese Coast Guard near the South China Sea. Officials said up to 51 foreign boats, including from Vietnam, Malaysia, and China, will be scuttled at several different locations over the next 2 weeks.
Over a dozen were scuttled Saturday near Pontianak in West Kalimantan province. Fisheries Minister Suzy Pujiastuti said the action was necessary to warn neighboring countries that Indonesia was serious about fighting illegal fishing.
Apa yang terjadi berapa minggu yang lalu, keberanian kapal sipil saja nabrak KRI kita. Sebelumnya kapal sipil mereka juga nangkep kapal patroli kita, PSDKP kita, sipil dan sipil itu sudah out of mind untuk kita tolerir lagi kejahatan terhadap negara. Jadi kalau kita orangnya toleran, solider, orang Indonesia ini orang baik, ya oke lah. Tapi kalau udah begitu kejahatan terhadap negara berkali-kali, masa ya kita mau toleran?
Since President Joko Widodo took office in 2014, hundreds of captured foreign fishing vessels have been sunk, more than half from Vietnam. The practice was suspended for several months, but has resumed since last week when a Vietnamese Coast Guard boat rammed an Indonesian Navy ship attempting to seize an illegal trawler. A dozen fishermen were detained and remain in Indonesian custody.
Jadi dari 529, 350 itu dari Vietnam. Ya, yang kedua ada Malaysia, ada Taiwan, ada Thailand. Itu nakoda dan kepala kamar mesinnya biasanya kan. Jadi itu yang dilakukan proses hukum. Dan proses hukumnya kan seringkali denda. Tetapi kalau dendanya tidak bisa dibayar, biasanya hukuman subsidiarnya adalah di hukuman kurungan gitu. Ya.
Pujiastuti said, and I quote, "If we don't act firm, they will be even more daring. I believe these collisions will get worse one day. This will escalate." Jakarta claims the area in the southernmost reaches of the South China Sea as its exclusive economic zone, and 2 years ago changed its name to the North Natuna Sea in a bid to show sovereignty. More recently, it inaugurated a new military base in the chain of several hundred small islands to beef up defenses. The moves prompted criticism from Beijing, whose claims in the sea overlap Indonesia's around the remote Natuna Islands.
Coming up, Barr says to senators, the Justice Department's job is over after the Mueller report. President Trump says Mueller report made Putin sort of smile during their call. Boeing plane skids into Florida River in crash landing. Its cause has yet to be determined. Trump says Kim Jong-un, and I quote, does not want to break his promise to me. Eagle News, Washington, D.C. We'll be right back.
Pep News, Linggo, alas 4 hanggang alas 5 ng hapon.
Welcome back. You are watching Eagle News, Washington, D.C. Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee chid U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr about his handling of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report on the Russia investigation. Barr tells the panel, and I quote, "We have to stop using the criminal justice process as a political weapon."
I appreciate very much what Mr. Mueller did for the country. I have read most of the report. For me, it is over.
You lied to Congress. You told Representative Charlie Crist that you didn't know what objections Mueller's team might have to your March 24th so-called summary. You told Senator Chris Van Hollen that you didn't know if Bob Mueller supported your conclusions, but you knew. You lied. And now we know.
Did anyone, either you or anyone on your staff, memorialize your conversation with Robert Mueller? Yes. Who did that? There were notes taken of the call. May we have those notes? No. Why not? Why should you have them?
In his opening statement to the Senate Judiciary Committee on his handling of the Mueller report, U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr said, and I quote, "We were frankly surprised that they were not going to reach a decision on obstruction." He says, and I quote, "the evidence developed by the special counsel was not sufficient to establish that the president committed a crime."
The report contained a substantial amount of material over which the president could have asserted executive privilege, but the president made the decision not to assert executive privilege and to make public as much of the report as we could, subject to the redactions that we thought required. Now, we first heard that the special counsel's decision not to decide the obstruction issue at the March 5th meeting when he came over to the department, and we were frankly surprised that they were not going to reach a decision on obstruction. And we asked them a lot about the reasoning behind this and the basis for this. And we had made clear that the results of the investigation were going to be made public. And the deputy and I felt that the evidence developed by the special counsel was not sufficient to establish that the president committed a crime, and therefore it would be irresponsible and unfair for the department to release a report without stating the department's conclusions, and thus leave it hanging as to whether the department considered there had been criminal conduct. So the Deputy Attorney General and I conducted a careful review of the report with our staffs and legal advisors. And while we disagreed with some of the legal theories and felt that many of the episodes discussed in the report would not constitute obstruction as a matter of law, we didn't rest our decision on that. We took each of the 10 episodes and we assessed them against the analytical framework that had been set forth by the special counsel, and we concluded that the evidence developed during the special counsel's investigation was not sufficient to establish that the president committed an obstruction of justice offense, pending release of the full transcript. That's what we were trying to do, notify the people as to the bottom line conclusion. We were not trying to summarize the 410-page report. And I asked him if he was suggesting that the March 24th letter was inaccurate, and he said no, but that the press reporting had been inaccurate, and that the press was reading too much into it. And I asked him, specifically what his concern was. And he said that his concern focused on his explanation of why he did not reach a conclusion on obstruction. And he wanted more put out on that issue.
Speaking to reporters about his call with Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, President Trump says discussing the Mueller report made Mr. Putin, and I quote, sort of smile when he said something to the effect that it started off as a mountain and it ended up being a mouse.
We're talking about a nuclear agreement where we make less and they make less, and maybe even where we get rid of some of the tremendous firepower that we have right now. So I think we're going to probably start up something very shortly between Russia and ourselves, maybe to start off, and I think China will be added down the road. We'll be talking about non-proliferation. We'll be talking about a nuclear deal of some kind, and I think it'll be a very comprehensive one. We discussed it. He actually sort of smiled when he said something to the effect that it started off as a mountain and it ended up being a mouse. But he knew that because he knew there was no collusion. Are you talking about
Officials said a Boeing 737 skidded off a runway into a river after crash landing during a lightning storm in Florida on Friday, with terrified passengers all safely evacuated to shore from the stricken jet's wings. Passengers said the plane carrying 143 people, including crew, from Guantanamo Bay in Cuba slammed into shallow water next to a naval air station in Jacksonville, Florida, after a hard landing that saw the plane bounce and swerve down the runway. No fatalities or critical injuries were reported.
Jacksonville Sheriff's Office said on Twitter 21 adults were taken to local hospitals, but none were critically injured. Others were treated for minor injuries at the scene. Naval Air Station Jacksonville said in a statement all 136 passengers and 7 aircrew on board had been accounted for. The National Transportation Safety Board said a team was being sent to investigate the incident. Navy security and emergency response personnel, including some 90 firefighters, attended the scene. Images show the Miami airplane lying partially submerged in water after the crash landing, with its nose cone missing. Jacksonville Mayor Lenny Curry tweeted that the White House has called to offer assistance as the situation was developing. Curry said, and I quote, "All alive and accounted for. Our fire and rescue teams are family to all." He added teams were working to control jet fuel spilling into the St. Johns River. The rotator flight from the U.S. base in Cuba carries passengers including military personnel and family members. Boeing said it was aware of the incident and gathering information. The U.S. aerospace giant is under scrutiny following 2 crashes that killed 346 passengers and crew and grounded its 737 MAX planes worldwide.
Navy security and emergency response personnel were at the scene immediately and began rescue efforts.
U.S. President Donald Trump says in a tweet that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un does not want to break his promise to him after South Korea said Pyongyang had launched several unidentified projectiles into the sea.
Trump tweeted, and I quote, "Anything in this very interesting world is possible, but I believe that Kim Jong-un finally realizes the great economic potential of North Korea and will do nothing to interfere or end it. He also knows that I am with him and does not want to break his promise to me. Deal will happen."
When we come back, EBC adds correspondents to its New Jersey and Pennsylvania bureaus, strengthening its North America team. Eagle News, Washington, D.C. We'll be right back.
ASEAN in Focus, Monday to Friday, 2 to 2:30 p.m.
This is Eagle News, Washington, D.C. I'm Ace Ramirez. Over the weekend, the Eagle Broadcasting Corporation added correspondents to its New Jersey and Pennsylvania bureaus, strengthening its growing North America team.
Correspondents from New Jersey and Pennsylvania cities talked strategy on how to deliver more information to the public through sharing what they see in their communities.
Welcome to our New Jersey Bureau.
To our surprise, this bureau is able to bring a lot of more new faces, and it's good to see today there's a lot of new people who are not part of the bureau yet.
The team said asking the public how they feel about the issues affecting their neighborhoods is one way to have their voices be heard. Citing World Press Freedom Day, EBC Bureau Chiefs Carlo Valdez of the Garden State and Milo Simbulan of the Keystone State agree that strengthening their teams by adding more correspondents to gather information is key to reaching more people in these parts of the country. And reaching more individuals means opportunities to help more communities.
There's just something about it that's like, it's second to none.
That is today's Eagle News, Washington, D.C. Join us again tomorrow for stories that matter to you. Visit our websites at eaglenews.ph and eaglenewslive.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/eaglenewsph. Thank you for watching. I'm Ace Ramirez, 1 with 25.